What he was able to do for the world and for Russia will go down in history as just remarkable.
Это могут быть срывы, болезни, спады, но мы будем меняться. Другого нет, товарищ. Другой путь — это тупик. Мы должны сотрудничать по-человечески.
Gorbachev took his decisions on the basis of life rather than dogma. Gorbachev could take risks, and Gorbachev evolved. The most important thing about Gorbachev is that he evolved.
Это приходит со временем, это не то, что какое-то озарение. Но вот с чего начиналось. И прожитая жизнь, университет, прожитая жизнь, почти полвека в политике, они привели меня к тому, что стало основой моей политики перестройки, моей позиции. Я бы сказал, реформаторской позиции, но глубокой реформы, которую я по последствиям сравнивал с революцией.
Mikhail Gorbachev, a contender for the Soviet leadership, is invited by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher to visit Britain. Mrs. Thatcher, a staunch anti-communist, wants to meet the man who may be the next leader of the Soviet Union. On December 15th, 1984, Mikhail and Raisa Gorbachev step off the plane and enchant a surprised Mrs. Thatcher.
Here was somebody who was completely and utterly different to every previous Soviet leader. Somebody self-confident, somebody who didn't need an army of advisors and apparatchiks to advise him what to say. The minute he came through the door, you could see this was a man who was different. Mr. Gorbachev and Mrs. Thatcher took to each other like ducks to water. Both of them are highly argumentative, highly disputatious people.
Я сказал, а в общем, вы знаете, госпожа Тэтчер, я знаю, что вы человек приверженец своим ценностям, уверенный человек. Но имейте в виду, и перед вами такой же сидит человек. И самое главное, я вам хочу сказать, у меня нет поручений агитировать вас вступить в Коммунистическую партию Советского Союза. Это хохот у нее вызвало большое, и все остальные, значит.
And so this extraordinary relationship was born, and one which Mrs. Thatcher crystallized at the end of their first meeting by saying,
I like Mr. Gorbachev. We can do business together.
Thatcher's remark startles the world and ignites the interest of many who wonder who this Mr. Gorbachev is and where he comes from. Mikhail Gorbachev is born to a peasant family in the Stavropol region of southern Russia on March 2nd, 1931. His father, Sergei Gorbachev, and his mother, Maria Panteleyevna, are peasant farmers. The first months of 1930 saw Stalin's drive to quash the spirit of his people. Millions of Soviet citizens are starved, murdered, or sent to prison camps during his 30-year reign of terror. Gorbachev's family is not spared Stalin's brutal regime.
Оба деда моих оказали в конфликте с властью. Причем самое интересное, один был крестьянин, единоличник, он не принял колхозы и остался единоличником. И оказался под судом. Причем под судом, что он не смог выполнить задание по посевам, там, как крестьянину нужно. Это в год, когда половина семьи его умерла. 3 человека из 6 умерло. А другой дед, наоборот, был коммунистом, и его за троцкизм арестовали и 14 месяцев мучили и приговорили к расстрелу. И только случай спас его.
Despite Stalin's oppression, Gorbachev believes in the Communist Party and its promise of a better life for the Soviet people.
It was not surprising that Gorbachev should join the party, because if someone was a person of ambition in the Soviet Union, joining the party was something you had to do to get on. It was, in a way, a kind of passport or a ticket you had to get along the way if you wanted to advance your career. Gorbachev, was a genuine believer in the party and the Soviet state.
At age 19, Gorbachev is accepted at the prestigious Moscow University. By his third year there, Gorbachev marries the woman who will be his key confidant and inspiration, Raisa Maximovna Titarenko,
с которой мы уже с юношеских лет вот вместе. Мы сошлись, когда ей было 20 лет, а мне 21 год. И вот с того времени мы все вместе, прошли всю жизнь, мы понимаем друг друга, поддерживаем.
After graduation, Gorbachev returns to Stavropol in 1955 and takes a position in the Komsomol Committee. He soon becomes a local communist official. His daughter Irina is born in 1959 during Gorbachev's rapid rise in the Communist Party. For the next 2 decades, the charismatic Gorbachev continues his ascent in the Communist Party and captures the attention of its leaders. In 1978, Gorbachev is called to Moscow by the Politburo. He is promoted to be secretary of the Central Committee responsible for agriculture during the time of détente with the United States. Gorbachev takes advantage of his new position. He and Raisa travel to Europe and witness life outside the Iron Curtain. What he sees shakes his devotion to communist ideology.
Gorbachev visited France and Italy and Germany in the 1970s, and he has said that it was when he saw with his own eyes what life was like in Western Europe that he realized the difference between that and Soviet propaganda.
In 1979, the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan. The war signifies the end of a fragile détente between the superpowers as the race for nuclear superiority accelerates.
It was so unpopular, this war. So this economic dissatisfaction, ideological pressure, and unpopular foreign policy, I would say that these factors gave us a feeling of a dead end.
In 1980, Gorbachev is promoted to be a full member of the Politburo, the governing body of the Soviet Union. At age 49, he is becoming one of the most influential members of the Politburo, and the youngest. In 1982, Leonid Brezhnev, leader of the Communist Party, dies of heart failure. 2 members of the old guard are selected to replace him. First, Yuri Andropov, once head of the infamous KGB, and then Konstantin Chernenko. Both die within 2 years of taking office.
They had a choice of having an old man once again. They had Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko, more dead than alive. They could continue in 1985 with another old man. Or they could choose a younger man, a more dynamic man.
В течение нескольких лет видел свое окружение, людей, которые правили этой великой страной. Он мне сам говорил, что хорошо, я не буду нарываться, не буду расталкивать локтями других для того, чтобы прорваться вверх, но если мне предложат, я не откажусь, потому что я чувствую себя способность в этом окружении сделать что-то такое для страны, что ей необходимо.
At age 54, Mikhail Gorbachev is elected General Secretary of the Soviet Union on March 11, 1985. A new Soviet era, in fact, a new world era, has begun.
When Gorbachev appeared, it was, I would say, some kind of explosion of wonderful hopes and expectations. We looked in our future with a hope And I hoped that I will be happy in this country and my children will be happy in Russia.
Что было у Горбачева? Истощенное господством военно-промышленного комплекса не только в экономике, а вообще общественной жизни и в политике, истощенная гонкой вооружений. Собственно, развитие страны уперлось в тупик, кругом дефициты, кругом нехватки.
Gorbachev is a radical departure from previous leaders who stood on a podium isolated from the public. Gorbachev reaches out. His charisma and sincerity win the trust of the people.
Поэтому тут и нестабильность, и перебои, и сбои. Но все равно на том, что мы были, уже дальше нельзя было жить. Через несколько лет мы в тупике были. Все должны перестроиться. Это процесс болезненный. Это же мы все с вами.
Посмотрите, какие мы все находимся. Посмотрите на нас.
Это стирать и мыться надо.
Женщины Советского Союза работают. У них руки у всех болят.
Значит, все-таки вопрос.
Но он говорит то, что он понимал еще накануне прихода к власти, что наш главный тезис, что так дальше жить нельзя, это было понятно. Я думаю, что двигало его больше уже общение с людьми. Ведь он же первый, кто начал вот так широко, да, собственно, после него это больше носило уже характер каких-то имиджевых кампаний, да?
Through Gorbachev, the Soviet people are learning to have a voice. Two words dominate the Soviet vocabulary: glasnost, meaning openness, and perestroika, meaning reconstruction and change. No one could have predicted the turbulence of change about to hit the Soviet Union.
Это могут быть срывы, болезни, спады, но мы будем меняться. Другого нет, товарищи. Другой путь — это тупик. Мы должны сотрудничать по-человечески, по-линии.
Then fate intervenes. The nuclear plant at Chernobyl explodes, sending poisonous radioactive material into the atmosphere and around the world. Chernobyl is a chilling example of the failure of the Communist Party.
Или Чернобыль. Надо было мобилизовать все ресурсы страны для того, чтобы погасить эту трагедию чернобыльскую. Система здесь не могла. И поэтому первые 3 года это было прелюдия, преддверие перестройки. А с 1988 года, когда мы увидели, что система не пускает, это уже вывод о том, что систему надо менять. Она не поддается реформированию.
Chernobyl has immediate repercussions. Rights denied for 70 years are now allowed. Banned music, books, newspapers, and theater are suddenly available. Freedom rings as Soviet citizens are allowed to protest, travel, emigrate, and openly practice their religion. The Iron Curtain is flung open as many revel in their newfound freedom.
Какие-то идеи появились. Он сам удивлялся, что сколько умов, оказывается, сколько талантов существует. Смотрите, какие статьи, оказывается, могут писать наши люди, если им дать свободу. Это хорошо.
И поэтому трудно было противнику, которые появились сразу, уже стали появляться, так сказать, в первые годы.
He expected that the party, including the top echelons of the party, would helpful and would actually be instrumental in perestroika. It worked like that only in the very beginning, when I think just based on the inertia of subordination and support. Then when things started to get difficult, even he was not ready for how difficult things will start to get.
Объявить перерыв или нет? С вами вопрос.
Указ подписан.
And they had fashioned, if you like, their own little power base. And they had put their own nominees in all the positions of power at the local level. Now, they didn't want change. They wanted to be left alone. They didn't want perestroika, they didn't want glasnost. They wanted to rule as they'd ruled before. And therefore Gorbachev said to them, your days are numbered and the Communist Party has to change, has to become more democratic. They didn't want to hear that.
Письма, которые идут, о чем люди в один голос говорили. Мы вас поддерживаем, мы за ваши планы, мы поддерживаем реформы. Имейте в виду, у нас ничего не меняется. Начальство как работало, как оно вело себя, так и ведет. Никакой демократии не признает, подавляет. Больше того, в Норильске мне сказали, знаете, успокойтесь, рабочим. Говорят, наши местные руководители говорят, успокойтесь. Пережили Хрущева, пережили Косыгина, переживем и вашего любимца Горбачева.
Gorbachev retires many of Brezhnev's most conservative colleagues and appoints a number of reformers.
А потом, как это было принято те годы, сказали, что Политбюро так решает. Вас назначает министром иностранных дел. И вот назначили, потом вначале было трудно очень, потому что я многими предметами не владел. Интересно было там, очень интересно и, главное, результативно.
With the help of his new foreign minister, Gorbachev extends his reforms to the West. He launches a radical new approach to Soviet diplomacy that electrifies the world.
До нашей встречи в Женеве советский руководитель, первые лица, так сказать, советского руководства, 6 лет не встречались с президентом Соединенных Штатов. Да, встречались там в рамках ООН министры иностранных дел, да и то это как, короткие колкости, обменивались и так далее. Вот. Не было, по сути дела, диалога не было. Прерван диалог, это самое опасное, самое опасное. Мало ли что может быть в воспаленном мозгу у каждого возникнуть. И так оно и было, возникало.
November 1985. President Ronald Reagan, who considers the Soviet Union the evil empire, and Mikhail Gorbachev meet for the first time in Geneva, Switzerland. The Geneva summit marks a turning point in US and Soviet relations. Reagan agrees with Thatcher. Gorbachev is someone he can do business with.
Мы посмотрели друг другу в глаза. Что-то возникло такое какое-то. Такой нормальный человеческий контакт. Пожали руки и попытались что-то. Он по-английски, я по-русски. Он ничего не знает по-русски, я не знаю ничего по-английски. Но тем не менее что-то говорили. И это создавало, что независимо ни от чего люди начинают что-то сказать.
If Gorbachev hadn't been as open-minded and as forward-leaning, it wouldn't have happened. And he was. He came in with a very different view as to how the Soviet Union and the U.S. should work when it came to treaty. But Gorbachev, I think, was willing to discuss it.
Достаточно сказать, что мы записали там, что мы, оба президента, считаем, что ядерная война недопустима и в ней не может быть победителей.
December 1987, the leader of the Soviet Union and the President of the United States meet on the steps of the White House. A pivotal moment the world will never forget as the two former adversaries begin to end the arms race.
Our peoples, for too long, have been both the masters and the captives of a deadly arms race. This situation is not preordained and not part of some inevitable course of history.
подобающими великой миролюбивой державе. Благодарю вас.
On behalf of the Soviet people, I declare that we are prepared to go all the way along our part of the road with the sincerity and responsibility that befit a great and peaceful power. Thank you.
What motivated Gorbachev? I think world peace, changing the Soviet system to opening it up to more democracy, and the reduction of terror related to nuclear weapons, nuclear war. I think these were his objectives.
Succeeding generations will hand down their verdict on the importance of the event which we are about to witness. But I will venture to say that what we are going to do has a universal significance for mankind, both from the standpoint of world politics and from the standpoint of humanism.
December 1987. President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev signed the INF Treaty, the first and only international treaty forever eliminating an entire class of nuclear missiles.
Some of the arms agreements in the end actually reduced the nuclear arsenals, which nobody would have predicted in 1985. But they actually did reduce the arsenals, which was a stupendous achievement. But also they buried the Cold War at the bottom of the Mediterranean, which is also a tremendous step forward.
In 1989, Mikhail Gorbachev ends the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan and brings the troops home. This daring move represents another blow to the conservatives and military leaders who view this as a sign of weakness and another signal that their power is eroding.
Gorbachev took his decisions on the basis of life rather than dogma. Gorbachev could take risks, and Gorbachev evolved. The most important thing about Gorbachev is that he evolved.
Gorbachev takes the first steps toward free elections in his country by forming the Congress of People's Deputies, the first Soviet governing body where 1/2 of the seats are contested in the country's first elections.
В общем-то, я не затрагивал эти темы. Мы, в общем-то, все втянуты в мировой процесс. И в контексте этого мы должны себя видеть и понимать. Поэтому мы будем меняться. Мы будем меняться в Союзе. Мы будем меняться в Европе. Никто не сорвет это.
Потому что, выйдя на путях развития демократических процессов и гласности, выйдя к тому, что мы начали демонтировать тоталитарную систему, покончили с монополией одной партии, вышли к политическому плюрализму, экономическому, признали ее инакомыслие, и, наконец, завершилось это самой мощной, свободными выборами.
Gorbachev presses ahead as the Communist Party is restructured. In 1990, the Congress amends Article 6, ending the Communist Party's monopoly of power. Multi-party elections are allowed for the first time in Soviet history. Gorbachev's reforms make headlines throughout the world, especially in Eastern Europe, where after years of Soviet control, the people believe they will finally be free.
Потому что, в конце концов, раз мы своему народу даем право выбора, и он выбирает путь демократии, движения к свободе, к рыночной экономике, спрашивается, разве мы можем другую занять позицию по отношению к нашим друзьям по Варшавскому договору?
I remember one key meeting in the White House. It was probably the turning point regarding the unification of Germany. And Gorbachev said, let the German people decide their future. I said, President, did I get you right now? You think that the Germans should have total self-determination. If they want to stay in NATO, they can do it. Warsaw Pact, yeah. And he said, absolutely. So that, I think, was probably as huge a historic moment as anything that happened in my presidency, because it led to the unification, and it led to the liberation of Eastern Europe, and it led to it all being done in peace.
Dear God, please hear us, listen to our prayer, and help us do thy will upon this earth. Let the children suffer war no more, and let a peaceful world be given birth. Every hand that holds a sword can hold a baby. Every heart.
He was a man who was really alive. And he had a message which everyone wanted to believe. Let's live in peace. Let's work together. Everyone wanted to hear that. It's an extraordinary phenomenon. A Soviet leader, a Russian leader, for the first time in history, becoming a world leader.
He was a humane man, and that ensured that the changes went ahead and that communism was brought to a peaceful end.
Somewhere deep inside the soldier there's a dreamer, dreaming of a world of peace. Lay down your arms, let time heal every
Mikhail Gorbachev becomes a worldwide sensation. Crowds cheer his name as the world becomes infused with Gorby mania. In October 1990, he is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the first and only Soviet leader to be recognized by the world for his courage and humanity.
За действиями товарища Горбачева. О том, что он не справится с этой работой, я писал в ноябре 1985 года, поднимите архив. И там как раз все это говорилось о вашей нерешительности, что вы будете и туда мотаться, и в это время произойдет то, что мы имеем сегодня.
While celebrated in the West, Gorbachev is alone and under constant attack within his own party.
Страны политика Михаила Сергеевича Горбачева в последнее время является ошибочной и опасной. И именно это является причиной напряженного положения в стране.
It was hell. Everyone was criticizing him. The party was split, and he had to decide whether should he in fact go off as the leader of the reforming faction and leave the conservatives and leave them to rot. Because as leader of the Communist Party, he couldn't say, I'm no longer a Marxist-Leninist, I'm no longer a communist, I've become a social democrat. If you're a social democrat, you should no longer be a leader of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union.
Товарищи демократы, вы разбежались. Наступает диктатура, заявляюсь со всей ответственностью. Никто не знает, какая это будет диктатура и кто придет, что за диктатор и какие будут порядки. Я хочу сделать следующее заявление. Я ухожу в отставку. Пусть это будет...
With chaos in the party, it is questionable how Gorbachev will withstand the next personal and political blow. Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze resigns at a time when Gorbachev needs him most.
Я говорил тогда руководству и другим тогдашним моим коллегам, но они не соглашались со мной. Единственная цель, которую я вынашивал, подавая в отставку, было то, что народ пробудился.
August 23, 1989, marks the 50th anniversary of the Baltic states being forced into the Soviet Union. With freedom in the air, the Baltic states launch a protest against their oppressors. People from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania link hands across thousands of kilometers and form a human chain of defiance. Despite the turmoil in his country, Gorbachev forges ahead. On March 15, 1990, Gorbachev is elected by the Congress of the People's Deputies as the first president of the Soviet Union. Though Gorbachev has won respect for his political and international revolution, the economy is in tatters. His attempt to change to a market economy further increased shortages in food and consumer goods. Perestroika only deepens the economic crisis and the anger of his people.
В магазинах ничего нету. Ведом, как эти самые... Вообще ничего нету. Ну, с утра вот разберутся... Нет. Ведь писали, мы не один раз писали.
Я думаю, мы это договоримся. Это вопрос не Михаил Сергеевич.
Ну, какая разница, мы жалуемся. Михаил Сергеевич политикой занимается, это экономика.
The Russian people who believed in Gorbachev now turn away from him and toward another politician, Boris Yeltsin.
He was a populist. As a politician, he wasn't as clever as Gorbachev. But as a populist, he was superior. He represents the Russian people. He presents himself as the savior of Russia.
Serious problems continue to plague Gorbachev. Demonstrations in the Baltics turn violent. Soviet troops attack and kill several protesters and leave hundreds more injured. Gorbachev claims innocence, but his credibility is diminished throughout the Western world and in the eyes of the people he vowed to protect.
Where people say that Gorbachev authorized the killings, it's just absolute rubbish. Gorbachev hated to see the breakup of the Union, but he'd have hated still more to use massive bloodshed to keep it together.
Gorbachev works feverishly to save the Union. He wants to establish a new Union treaty giving the Republic sovereignty. Gorbachev promises a democratic constitution for all people of the Soviet Union.
He was just about totally preoccupied with keeping the country together. He believed that the separation of the republics would be bad for everyone. He believed that a new kind of union was possible. So he believed that they could be made truly sovereign and at the same time benefit from close political, economic, and cultural association. He believed that this was mission possible, but it took all his efforts.
Gorbachev achieves his goals. On March 17, 1991, more than 50% of the population vote in favor of keeping the Soviet Union together.
Вы пришли на этот митинг
Each republic is allowed to amend its constitution and directly elect a president. On June 12, 1991, Boris Yeltsin becomes the first freely elected president of Russia. With a new Union treaty ready to be signed, Gorbachev and his family depart for their summer vacation, optimistic for their country's future. Just days before the Union treaty is signed, a crisis explodes. A group of high officials enter Gorbachev's dacha and place him under arrest. The group announces that Gorbachev is ill and cannot fulfill his duties as president.
Со всеми вытекающими отсюда последствиями. Я заявляю, что все, что касается состояния моего здоровья, это обман. Таким образом, на обмане совершен антиконституционный переворот. Законный президент страны отстранен от исполнения своих обязанностей. Более того, дача в Крыму, где я нахожусь на отдыхе, окружена войсками, я нахожусь под арестом.
Events overnight are clearly a very ominous development indeed. There seems little doubt that President Gorbachev has been removed from power by an unconstitutional seizure of power.
We were shook up. We're saying, does this mean that they're going to set back the great progress that Gorbachev had made? Does this mean that the fledgling steps toward democracy are going to be swept out of the sand and erased? And so we didn't know. Well, I also had this feeling that a friend was in deep trouble.
Soviet Vice President Gennady Yanayev is now named acting president. The committee's 8 members, trusted colleagues of Gorbachev's, have betrayed him and their country.
Это не новость. Предавали всегда, начиная с Иисуса Христа, если говорить. Предали, так сказать, и его, и распяли. Это не новость. Это для меня было величайшей драмой, невыносимой раной, которая не заживает и сейчас. Я очень благодарен, что в этот труднейший момент вообще вся семья оказалась со мной. Я сказал им, Раисе сначала, потом и детям, что ситуация такова, что я вижу, что это приехали люди, которые будут предъявлять мне всякие ультиматумы. Ни на какую сделку я не пойду.
Абсолютно смертельная рана. Конечно, вот там пара суток вот этой абсолютной безысходности, когда никаких ни контактов, ни информации, ничего, и совершенно непонятна судьба, это смертельные удары, которые переживаются с трудом.
Six years of Mikhail Gorbachev has changed the Soviet people. They have found their voice as thousands rise up in protest against the coup. The protesters are led by Boris Yeltsin, who demands the return of freedom and President Gorbachev.
Соответственно, объявляем незаконными все решения и распоряжения этого комитета. Уверены, органы местной власти будут неукоснительно следовать конституционным законам и указам президента России.
On August 21st, 4 days after the coup began, it collapses. An exhausted Gorbachev and his family return to Moscow.
Кончилось тем, что он сказал, знаете что, вы погубите себя, это черт с вами, ваше дело, как распорядиться своей жизнью, все. Но вы погубите страну.
The reason why it failed was, first of all, that the Soviet Union had changed. Gorbachev had changed the Soviet Union. The population was no longer afraid. They would come out and demonstrate. And it presented him, Yeltsin, as a savior of Russia. But of course, the one he was saving was Gorbachev. But Yeltsin knew that when Gorbachev came back to Moscow, he was a dead dog. He would be politically dead. And Yeltsin could then play the dominant role.
The end of the coup marks the beginning of Yeltsin's rise to world recognition. Gorbachev's power erodes around him as he tries to re-establish the Union Treaty. 7 republics agree to form a new confederation, but Yeltsin has other plans. He withdraws Russia from the Union and nullifies the 1922 treaty which established the Soviet Union. This is all done in a secretive meeting on December 8, 1991. Gorbachev learns about the end of the Soviet Union when it is too late to save it.
It was unexpected that a leader of Russia should play the Russian card against the Union, because Russia had been the dominant part of the Union. And yet Yeltsin was so anxious to get Gorbachev out of the Kremlin and himself inside that he was prepared to endanger the Union to do so.
December 25th, 1991. The Soviet flag is lowered for the final time. After 74 years, the Soviet Union no longer exists. That same evening, President Gorbachev announces his resignation, refusing to use force to keep his power intact.
I was standing right there in that room in the Kremlin where he was making that speech. There were perhaps 20, 25 other people there too, and it was really a very poignant moment, and I felt it was a tragic moment.
I knew he was hurting badly. We had a friendship that was real, not just a political friendship. On that last phone call, it was like a friend of mine was hurting. He had done a lot. We still had some big differences, Russia, the United States. But overwhelming at that moment was the fact that this friend of mine was stepping down and he was hurting inside.
Дорогие соотечественники, сограждане, в силу сложившейся ситуации с образованием Содружества независимых государств я прекращаю свою деятельность на посту президента СССР. Я покидаю свой пост с тревогой, но и с надеждой, с верой в вас, в вашу мудрость и силу духа. Желаю всем вам самого доброго.
На то, чтобы каждый за свое дело лучше отвечал. Это.
Я об этом пишу, что это трагедия и Горбачева, и страны, что она отвергла единственный шанс, который был своевременно предложен стране.
In the last year or two, I think he realized that actually he was going to be a victim of the changes he had made, and it's to his credit that he did persevere with them. I have a very high regard for him personally. I think he was an honourable man in the last resort. I think he was a decent man.
And I trusted him from the very beginning, and I think properly so. And I think what he was able to do for the world and for Russia will go down in history is just remarkable.
Though Russians are better off today, subsequent leaders have failed to follow Gorbachev's vision of an open and democratic country. But in those few short years of glory, Gorbachev's revolution changed the world and left all of us freer than we had ever been.
Тем более, что мои устремления самые были демократичные, самые человечные, обращенные к тому, чтобы все-таки, наконец, в огромной, богатой стране люди могли достойно жить.
Dear God, please hear us, listen to our prayer, and help us do thy will upon this earth.